The train wheezed like an old creature dying in the desert heat. Steam rolled across the platform, curling around the boots of the few men waiting there. Lone Creek was not a town where many trains stopped. It was a place where people came only if they were running from something, or toward something they could not name. Eli Carter stood at the far end of the platform, hat low over his eyes, thumbs hooked through his belt. Dust coated his long coat and the cracked leather of his boots. His face was lined from sun and silence, the kind of face that looked carved rather than born. He wasn't used to waiting for anyone. Most of his life had been cattle, fences, storms, and the dry voice of solitude. But today, a letter in his pocket said that a woman was coming, his woman, if the good Lord allowed. The passengers spilled out, all chatter and clatter. Families meeting again, traders shouting for wagons, a preacher wiping his brow. Then, near the last car, she appeared. A small woman, maybe 25, maybe younger. Her dress, once white, now dulled by weeks of travel. She clutched a carpet bag that looked ready to burst, and she stepped down with care, because her shoes were torn clean through. The sight made something in Eli twist. The girl looked around uncertain, searching for the man whose name she'd only seen in ink. When her eyes met his, time slowed. There was no music, no grand announcement, just the wind and the creak of wood under her feet. She hesitated, then walked toward him, the hem of her skirt brushing the dust. "Mr. Carter?" she asked softly. The accent carried a faint eastern lilt. He removed his hat. "Eli," he said. "Just Eli," she nodded once, gripping her bag tighter. "I'm Clara Rose Hale, the agency." "They said you wrote." "I did." His voice came low, careful. "You come a long way, Miss Hale." "Yes, sir." Her smile faltered. "I apologize for the shoes. The road from the last stop was longer than I thought." They gave out halfway. Eli looked down. The leather flapped around her feet, her toes nearly showing through. Then he looked back at her face, tired but proud, eyes like storm-washed glass. He said quietly, "Then you've brought everything." Clara blinked, unsure she'd heard right. "Everything?" "Everything that matters." He held out his hand. "You came." For a heartbeat, she only stared. Then she placed her hand in his, small and trembling. His grip was rough, warm, steady, the first steady thing she'd touched in months. The wagon ride to the ranch took the better part of the afternoon. The land stretched endless, rippling grass, dry gullies, hawks circling against a white-hot sky. Neither of them spoke much. When Eli did, it was to point at distant hills, a creek, the smoke from a neighbor's chimney 5 miles off. Clara listened, grateful for the sound of another voice. At last, the ranch came into view. A weathered house crouched against the horizon, barn behind it, fences running crooked across the field. It looked lonely but strong, like the man beside her. Eli helped her down, careful not to let her stumble. "Ain't much," he said. "But it's honest," Clara smiled faintly. "That's more than I had before." Inside smelled of pine and coffee. A few chairs, a wide hearth, a Bible on the table, and nothing else that wasn't necessary. He showed her the small spare room. "You can rest here. I'll fix supper." She touched the quilt folded at the foot of the bed. "Did you make this?" He shook his head. "My sister did. Long time ago." When he left, she sat down, staring at her hands. They were thin and cracked from factory work and travel. Her heart thudded with the strangeness of it all. This man, this land, this chance at a life she'd only dared to dream about. That night, after supper, Eli sat on the porch with his pipe while Clara washed the dishes. The wind shifted, carrying her quiet humming through the doorway, a tune too soft to name. He felt it settle in his chest like warmth after winter. When she stepped outside, the sky was painted in violet and gold. She wrapped her shawl tight. "Do you always get sunsets like this?" "Most days," he said. "Hard to notice when you're alone." She looked at him. "You're not alone anymore." He didn't answer, just stared at the horizon, but something in his jaw softened. Days slipped into weeks. Clara learned the rhythm of ranch life, the creak of the windmill, the lowing of cattle, the way mornings smelled of dust and coffee. Eli was a man of few words but steady habits. He rose before dawn, worked till dark, and every evening left his hat on the same hook by the door. She, meanwhile, filled the silence with small acts, mending curtains, planting herbs by the window, sweeping dust that would only return the next day. Each gesture felt like building a home from ghosts. One morning, she caught him watching her hang laundry, the sun behind her turning the plain dress almost white again. She blushed under his gaze. "Need help?" he asked, voice gruff. "I can manage." He nodded and handed her a clothespin she'd dropped. Their fingers brushed, and for an instant, she felt the spark of something too new to name. That night she couldn't sleep. Through the thin wall she heard him moving about. Boots on the floorboards, a sigh, the faint scratch of a match lighting his pipe. She wondered what he thought about. Maybe the same thing she did, how two strangers might build a life out of nothing but kindness and will. A week later, a storm rolled in from the west, dark and loud. Eli was out mending fences when the sky split open. Clara stood on the porch, rain drenching her skirt, watching for him. When he finally appeared through the downpour, leading a horse, she ran out before she could think. "Eli," she cried. "You'll drown out there!" He laughed, a rare deep sound, and helped her pull the horse into the barn. They were both soaked, breathless. For the first time she saw him smile fully, eyes crinkling. It made him look 10 years younger. "Next time," he said. "Wait inside." "I couldn't," she admitted. "Didn't feel right." He looked at her then, rain dripping from his hat brim. "You worry too much. You don't worry enough." Their laughter echoed off the barn walls, and for a heartbeat, the world felt small and safe. Then the air changed. The laughter faded. They were standing too close, his hand still on hers. For one wild second she thought he might kiss her, but he stepped back, clearing his throat. "We'd best get dry." She nodded quickly, face burning. "Yes, of course." That night the rain drummed steady on the roof. Clara sat by the hearth, brushing her damp hair. Eli came in quietly, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He handed her one and sat across from her. "Thank you," she said. He shrugged. "Figured it'd warm you." They sat in silence, the firelight painting gold on his face. She wanted to ask about his sister, his life before Lone Creek, but she sensed he wasn't ready. Still, his eyes lingered on her a moment too long before he looked away. When she finally went to bed, her heart was a storm of its own. The next morning brought clear skies and calm wind. The world smelled of wet earth. Clara walked barefoot to the porch, the boards cool under her feet. She stared out across the open fields and whispered a prayer she hadn't said in years. Inside, Eli watched from the doorway, unseen. He noticed her torn shoes lying beside the step, the same ones she'd arrived in. He made a quiet decision. That afternoon, while she cooked, he went into the attic and brought down a small box. Inside lay a pair of soft leather boots, smaller than his, well-made, barely worn. He hesitated a long time before carrying them to her. "They were my sister's," he said. "She didn't live long enough to wear them out." Clara's breath caught. "I can't take those." "You can," he said. "Better someone wears them than they sit gathering dust." She touched the boots as though they might vanish. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," he said gently. "Just wear 'em." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Loss, gratitude, maybe the first fragile thread of love. That evening, she wore the boots while walking the fence line with him. The sky bled crimson as the sun dropped. They spoke little, but the quiet between them was easy now. When they reached the end of the field, Eli said softly, "This land's got a way of testing folks. If you can stand it, you can stand most anything." "I've stood worse," she said. Then, after a pause, "But I think I could stand this." He looked at her, searching her face. The wind lifted a strand of her hair. "I reckon you could." That night the candle burned late in her window. Eli saw it from the barn and smiled to himself, a small, unfamiliar ache warming his chest. For the first time in years, Lone Creek didn't feel like the end of the world. It felt like the start of something quietly miraculous. Spring melted slowly into summer on the plains. The grass grew high and gold. The air buzzed with insects and the far-off hum of the windmill. Every day began the same. Sunrise light sliding through the windows, the sound of Eli's boots on the porch, the smell of coffee Clara brewed before he saddled up. Routine had a comfort neither of them had known before. She no longer waited by the door when he rode out. She trusted he'd return. He, in turn, began to leave a little earlier, just so he could catch her smile before the sun rose. But beneath the rhythm, something deeper stirred, something both feared to name. One morning, Clara woke to find Eli gone earlier than usual. The sky was still pale blue, the kind of color that looked like hope. She stepped outside. the leather boots he'd given her fitting perfectly now. She found him by the corral, working a new stallion, black as sin and twice as stubborn. The animal kicked, tossed its head, tried to throw him. Eli moved with a patience that came from years of loneliness. Watching him, Clara realized something quietly painful. She wanted this man's trust the way the stallion wanted freedom. When the horse finally calmed, Eli saw her leaning on the fence. Sweat glistened on his neck. Dust clung to his shirt. He smiled slightly. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," she said. "The air feels different today." He wiped his brow, still catching his breath. "Storm's coming, maybe. Not the kind that brings rain," she murmured. He met her eyes, and for a second the distance between them wasn't just space. It was the unspoken truth. Both of them had been broken long before they'd met, and somehow they'd found each other in the wreckage. By noon, clouds gathered, not of weather but of worry. The ranch was behind on supplies. One of the fences had been trampled by strays. Eli decided to ride into town. "You should stay," he told her. "No sense in you tiring yourself." Clara shook her head. "I've been in trains and rooms all my life. I need open air." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but it's a long ride. I can manage." They rode together through the heat, two silhouettes against the rolling prairie. Along the way, they passed a dried creek bed and the ruins of a homestead long abandoned. Clara asked softly, "What happened here?" Eli kept his gaze ahead. "Man built it for his wife. She died of fever the first winter. He burned it down himself. Couldn't stand the silence." She looked at him, sadness flickering. "You talk like someone who's known silence a long time." He didn't answer right away. "It's easier than talking to people who leave." She wanted to tell him she wouldn't leave, but the words stuck. She'd promised before, to people who hadn't kept her. Instead, she just said, "Maybe some silences are worth filling." When they reached town, eyes turned. Mail-order brides weren't rare, but people loved to talk. Clara held her head high, but she could feel the whispers. Eli noticed too. He glared at a man who looked too long, and that was enough to make the town remember who he was. They bought flour, salt, nails, and a bolt of fabric. Clara ran her fingers across the cloth, blue as the evening sky. "Would it be too much?" she asked. "For what?" "A dress. Something not borrowed from the past." Eli studied her face, saw the hint of hope there. "No, not too much." He added the cloth to the order without another word. It was a small thing, but when she looked at him, her smile was brighter than the sunlit dust around them. On the ride back, thunder grumbled low, rolling across the hills. By the time they reached the ranch, the wind had turned fierce. They worked together to secure the animals, rush the feed inside, close the barn doors. Rain came hard and fast, slamming the roof like fists. They barely made it into the house before the sky split open. Lightning flashed, turning the room white. Clara flinched, heart pounding. Eli lit a lantern and set it between them. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, though her hands shook. "Just storms. They remind me of nights back east." Before the factory burned, he sat down beside her, voice low. "You don't have to tell me." "I want to," she said, surprising herself. "I was working there when it happened. My sister, too. Only one of us got out." The words broke something loose inside her. Tears she hadn't allowed in years welled up. Eli didn't speak, didn't try to fix it. He just placed a hand on her shoulder, steady as stone. She turned to him, eyes glistening. "I thought I'd forgotten how to feel anything." "You didn't forget," he said gently. "You just got tired of hurting." The lantern light flickered across their faces. The storm raged outside, but in that quiet corner the air was warm, alive. She reached up and brushed his cheek with her fingertips. He froze, not from shock, but from the weight of tenderness he hadn't known how to carry. "Eli," she whispered, "you don't have to be alone anymore." He covered her hand with his. "Neither do you." The lightning flashed again, and when it faded, they were still there. Two lost souls finally daring to lean on each other. Days passed after that night, each one softer. Clara began sewing her blue dress in the evenings. Eli built a porch swing out of old lumber. They didn't talk about what was changing between them. They simply let it happen, like rain soaking into dry earth. Sometimes she'd hum while he worked. Sometimes he'd bring her wildflowers from the pasture, awkwardly tucked behind his back. They laughed more easily, and the laughter stayed in the air long after the sound faded. But not all peace lasts untested. One afternoon, a rider came from town, a wiry man with a telegram. Eli opened it, eyes narrowing. "They're asking for payment early. If we don't send the cattle by next week, we lose the deal." He paced the porch, jaw tight. "We'll have to drive them ourselves." "Won't be easy." Clara stepped closer. "I can help. You've helped enough." Her chin lifted. "You said this land tests people. Let it test me too." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "All right. We ride at dawn." The cattle drive was hard. Dust and heat by day, cold by night. Clara rode beside him, hands blistered, hair tangled. Yet she never complained. Each time she faltered, Eli was there, steadying her horse, passing her water, saying nothing but letting his presence speak what words couldn't. On the fourth night, they made camp by a dry riverbed. The sky blazed with stars vast and endless. Clara sat wrapped in a blanket, watching the firelight dance on his face. "Eli," she said softly, "what do you want out of all this?" He poked the fire with a stick. "Peace, I guess. Maybe someone who stays." She hesitated. "And if that someone's already here?" His gaze lifted slowly. The space between them vanished. "Then I'd be a fool not to see it." Her heart hammered. "You see it now?" "I've seen it since the day you stepped off that train with those torn shoes." He reached out, brushing her cheek with the back of his hand. The touch was gentle, reverent. She closed her eyes, leaning into it. The fire crackled, the wind whispered through the grass, and for once, the world didn't feel so wide. By the time they returned home, the cattle sold and the deal secured, something had shifted. The house no longer felt empty. Clara's laughter filled the rooms. Eli's silence softened into warmth. A week later, she finished the blue dress. When she stepped out wearing it, Eli nearly forgot to breathe. "You like it?" she asked shyly. He smiled. "I like you in it." She blushed, laughter spilling from her like sunlight. "You never were much for fancy talk." "Never needed to be," he said, stepping closer. "You understand plain words. And what are your plain words now?" He took her hand. "Stay, for good. Not as a promise written on paper, but as someone who wants to be here." Tears welled in her eyes. "I already am." He kissed her then, not hurried, not hungry, but slow and certain, like the first rain after drought. The world went still. Even the wind seemed to pause to watch. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "Do you still think I brought everything?" He smiled against her forehead. "No," he said. "You brought more than I knew I needed." Years later, folks around Lone Creek would still talk about the cowboy and the bride with torn shoes, how she arrived with nothing, and somehow left that man with everything he'd been missing. But for Eli and Clara, those were just stories. What mattered was the life they built from dust and faith, the home that grew warm, the fields that bloomed, and the love that started with a single, simple sentence, "Then you've brought everything."